There's a lot of debate about how effective Justin Fields will be at quarterback for the Jets in 2025. But one thing is for certain, how good he is will tell us a lot about how good new offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand is. That and more today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, May 21st, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. On today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. We'll have questions asking for a surprise breakout player. We'll have a question about how good Garrett Wilson really can be. But let's begin with a question about new offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand. The question goes, how does this new offensive coordinator schemes differentiate from what Ben Johnson ran in Detroit? What strategies did he implement with the Lions, and what is he known for? How will he utilize Justin Fields differently than the Lions did with Jared Goff? Fields has a different skill set. You can't run the Goff offense and expect him to have success. Really good questions. And unfortunately, any answer I give will be kind of a educated guess. And the reason for that is this is the first time Tanner Engstrand will be an offensive coordinator in the NFL. This is the first time he's being put totally in charge of an NFL offense. And last year, everything that happened with the Detroit Lions, ultimately the buck stopped with Ben Johnson. He was the offensive coordinator. Now, we know Tanner Engstrand was on the coaching staff as the passing game coordinator, which presumably meant he had quite a bit to do with the game planning for the Lions passing calls. But it's very difficult to answer that question. So the biggest job I think any coach has is put players in the most likely position they can have to have success. Because ultimately, a coach can't throw the ball. A coach can't read the defense. A coach can't run the ball. A coach can't catch. A coach can't run routes. A coach can't block. But coaches can put players in good positions. Coaches can put players in positions to succeed. And that's about understanding the strengths of your players and understanding the weaknesses of your opposition. And, you hear these legendary stories about NFL coaches sleeping in their office all night. They have a cot in their office and they're breaking down film until early in the morning. And in all honesty, I wonder whether they wouldn't be better served going home and getting a full night of sleep, because sometimes the stuff you see on Sunday is really out there. Sometimes coaches overthink this stuff. And, I wonder if sometimes coaches wouldn't benefit from getting away from the game for a little while. But the reason that these coaches work all hours is they are trying to figure out how to put their players in the position to succeed. And sometimes that means utilizing their skill sets. And sometimes it means attacking an opponent's weakness. So the things I will judge Tanner Engstrand on are really based on how well he puts his players in the position to succeed. Now, I think anybody who looked at the Detroit Lions offense last year would conclude that their passing game was very well designed. Jared Goff is a talented quarterback. I think people sell Jared Goff a little bit short because, he's not on that Mahomes, Burrow, Lamar level. Josh Allen, we can throw him in the mix. He's not at that elite level quarterback play. What he is, he's a guy who, if you put him in the right situation, he can have success and you can win games with him. And one of the things I think the Lions did very well was design route combinations that get the primary read wide open frequently. And that's one of the things that will help a quarterback like Justin Fields, who, has struggled at points going through his reads. Fields is another guy who I think you could make a strong case. He's not going to be an elite quarterback this year. The odds are against him ever being a top 5 quarterback, but he's a guy who's flashed ability. He's shown that in the right situation, he can have success. So I think the question is correct, though. Ultimately, the way you have success with Jared Goff is different from the way you have success with Justin Fields. Jared Goff is not a mobile passer at all. He's really a pure pocket quarterback, not even a guy who's really that adept at extending plays. You have your quarterbacks who are great runners like Lamar Jackson. Then you have your quarterbacks who maybe aren't great rushers, but have the mobility to extend plays. That's like a Joe Burrow. Goff's a pure pocket passer. Justin Fields is a guy who can be a dynamic runner. Justin Fields is the type of guy, if you have a coach designing an offense well, can run for 700 or 800 yards in the season. And that means incorporating Fields in the run game. So this means leaning into his strengths. So I think if Tanner Engstrand is a quality coach, he's not just going to incorporate the Detroit playbook and run the Detroit offense. I think that he's got to lean into what he's got in Justin Fields. Now, part of that does mean implementing some of the cutting-edge passing concepts the Detroit Lions ran. That was a critical part of Jared Goff's success, and it's the type of thing that can work with Justin Fields, who is not a bad passer, but a guy who has shown some limitations in the passing game, very similar to Jared Goff. But Fields adds an extra dimension running the ball. And the thing is, like, if you can design a zone read for Fields where he picks up 8 yards, that essentially takes the place of an 8-yard completion. And every time Fields rips off a big run, that's one less pass he needs to hit. So let's exploit that. And you can even incorporate plays where maybe Fields can read. If he sees an opening in front of him, he can tuck and run. Or if he sees a guy downfield, he can throw. Incorporate some run-pass options into the offense. Fields adds an extra element that Jared Goff doesn't have. At the end of the day, Justin Fields' biggest improvement will come because of Justin Fields. And if he doesn't improve, Justin Fields will be the number one reason. But coaches do have an impact. And again, it's really about putting a player in a position to succeed. I think that if Justin Fields is put in the right type of offense, he could be a functional quarterback in this league. He's the type of guy you can win games with. And I think that, again, we are so obsessed, and not unfairly so. We're so obsessed with like the top 5 quarterbacks, the guys that like make their teams instant contenders if you put a quality roster around them, that we sell short the guys who don't quite get there. The first round picks who are just guys who, in the good situation, they can thrive. And I think that might be the type of quarterback Justin Fields can be. And, there's always this argument people ask, if a quarterback struggles, is it the quarterback's fault or is it the coach's fault? And the reality is these are not mutually exclusive things. Sometimes it's a little from column A and a little from column B. And I think that the Jets, the coaching staff, has a task in front of it. And I think that if Justin Fields fails, it's not entirely because of the coaching staff, and it's not entirely because of Justin Fields. But if Justin Fields succeeds, I think the coaching staff will play a role. Because I think that if the Jets put Justin Fields in the right type of offense, if they incorporate the types of principles that suit his skill set, that you can really end up getting solid results. The results that would justify a $20 million salary at the quarterback position, which in this day and age at the quarterback position is not an exorbitant amount to pay. And I would say that Justin Fields' performance will tell us a lot about Tanner Engstrand's quality, because it's pretty clear Justin Fields was the Jets' number one choice this offseason. They went out and targeted him right as free agency began, and they outbid the Pittsburgh Steelers for him. The Jets clearly wanted Fields they clearly wanted Fields to be their quarterback. And I don't think you would do that unless you had an offensive coordinator who really felt like he understood the quarterback's skill set and had a firm plan for how to maximize that skill set. So I think there's a lot on Tanner Engstrand in year one to show that he understands the quarterback he has and how to maximize that player's ability. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the number one receiver Justin Fields will be throwing to, Garrett Wilson. There is a huge debate in the fan base whether Garrett Wilson can actually be a top 5 receiver, whether he's been held back by his quarterback play. Now, we all know Garrett's been held back by his quarterback play, but I think the question is kind of irrelevant. And I'll explain why as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work does not end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Here's how it works. You post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. Of course, this offseason, the Jets went out and got Justin Fields, and I think we can assume Tanner Engstrand was behind that. Tanner Engstrand scouted Fields along with Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji. Well, you don't really have the ability to scout players to that level, but LinkedIn can. LinkedIn can be your scouting department. Post your job for free.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question. John, is it possible Garrett Wilson can be a top 5 receiver in this league? If you look through his career, he's had Zach Wilson throwing him the ball his first 2 seasons. Then last year, Aaron Rodgers was a shell of himself. Is it possible Garrett's a superstar who's been hiding because of his bad quarterback play? Well, it's a very interesting question. Hopefully Justin Fields is good enough to find out. Hopefully Justin Fields is the quarterback who turns Garrett Wilson into a superstar. But I actually don't think the question to this matters much, and I'll explain why. Yes, if Garrett Wilson could go from being a 1,000-yard, 1,100-yard receiver to being a 1,500-yard receiver, it would make an impact on this team. But the thing is, like, Garrett Wilson's been one of the few pieces of the offense that's been part of the solution rather than part of the problem the last 3 years. He's a legitimate number one receiver. And ultimately, yes, there's a difference between what Garrett Wilson's done and what Justin Jefferson has done. And yes, if Garrett Wilson could up his production with better quarterback play, it would be a big deal for the Jets. But I kind of look at it this way. Do I think Garrett Wilson can be the type of guy who's the number one skill player on a Super Bowl winning team? Is he the type of guy, it could be sometimes your number one skill player is a running back, sometimes it's a tight end. Most of the time it's a wide receiver. If Garrett Wilson's your number one go-to guy, can you win a Super Bowl? I think the answer to that's yes. Garrett Wilson's a 1,000-yard receiver consistently, 3 years in the league, 3,000-yard seasons. And he did it with bad quarterback play. I don't know how much bad quarterback play really impacts it, though. Because I think you have a couple of different factors that maybe cancel each other. Of course, when you don't have as talented of a quarterback, the throws are going to be less accurate. Sometimes you'll get the ball thrown to you while you're being covered. But the thing is, if you look at Garrett Wilson's career, he's consistently been near the top of the league in targets. And I think part of that's due to not having good quarterback play because, Zach Wilson couldn't really read a defense. So if you're Zach Wilson and you don't know what you're seeing back there, you're probably just going to default throw the ball to Garrett Wilson. So, even though Garrett Wilson might be more efficient with a better quarterback play, he still was producing a lot because he just saw such a big target share. But ultimately, like, Garrett Wilson's good enough. If you told me in 2022 when the Jets drafted him 10th overall that this is what we get from Garrett Wilson, I would have been delighted. I think you would have been delighted. He's one of the few pieces of the offense that's justifying his role. He's a number one receiver, and that's what you want. I wish that there were more pieces on the offense like Garrett Wilson. You look across the league, typically, like, even the guys in bad quarterback situations get their numbers if they're talented enough. So I don't think it's a situation where Garrett Wilson's like suffering. Is it possible he ups his production with better quarterback play? Absolutely. Would I be delighted if it happened? Absolutely. Am I confident it would happen? Not really. Is it a big deal? Absolutely not. Again, like, give me Garrett Wilson any day of the week. Give me a guy like Garrett Wilson as my number one receiver. I'll be happy. Let's fix the rest of the offense around him. The issue is not Garrett Wilson failing to be a top 5 receiver. The issue is, like, nobody else on the offense justifying their role. So that to me is that's where I'd go there. Our next question, John, I keep hearing about the Bill Parcells influence on Aaron Glenn. Call me crazy, but I think it's a little bit early to be comparing Aaron Glenn to a Hall of Fame coach. Can't we at least wait for him to get through a training camp first? Yeah, it is. If we're being honest, it absolutely is too early to be comparing Aaron Glenn to Bill Parcells. And look, Parcells was Aaron Glenn's mentor. Parcells coached him during their time together with the Jets. And what I would say is that I think in dealing with the media, I do see a lot of Parcells and Aaron Glenn. He is able to. We've had a lot of Jets coaches in recent memory who have kind of been dismissive toward the media. And, Adam Gase is one. I think in his own way, Todd Bowles was one. Eric Mangini was like that. But they don't do it the right way. Parcells was that way with the media, but he had a charisma to him where he was very charming as it was almost like he was telling the media that they were dumb, but he did it in such a charming way that, like, the response was, yeah, you're right. We're not on your level. That's kind of like the vibe you got from reporters. And I think I see some of that stylistically in Glenn. But yeah, like, Parcells is a Hall of Fame coach. Aaron Glenn has not coached a game yet. I think that you always take certain attributes from your mentors. And that's not just true in when we're talking football coaches. It's true in pretty much any walk of life, any job you do. If you have a mentor, you'll take certain things from them. You'll learn from them. And Aaron Glenn has multiple mentors. Parcells was not the only guy who taught Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn worked with Sean Payton during his time as an assistant coach with the Saints. He also, of course, the last couple of years worked under Dan Campbell. And what the best do is they have a lot of quality mentors. And this is not just true of football coaching. So this is advice you can take to your own career. Find quality mentors, multiple quality mentors. Examine how they do their job. And think about, when I'm in their job, when I'm promoted, how will I handle it? And think about the things you like that they do. And think about the things you don't like that they do. And develop your own style. Ultimately, if Aaron Glenn's successful, I think he will take lessons from Bill Parcells. But that does not mean he is going to succeed as a Parcells clone. Famously, Bill Belichick's disciples have failed frequently in the NFL. And you see over and over that they just try and present themselves as Belichick Jr. They try and do everything the way Belichick does, and it doesn't work that way. You can't have success that way. You have to be your own person. You have to take the things that you think are good and meld them with your own style. And ultimately, if Aaron Glenn has success as Jets head coach, that's how it will happen. He'll take some of the best parts of Bill Parcells and Sean Payton and Dan Campbell, and he'll put his own spin on them. And that's how a coach ends up having success in this league. So it's not just about it's not about being a Parcells disciple. And you've seen Parcells disciples have great success in this league. You've seen some of them fail. And ultimately, I think there's something to the idea that you have to put your own spin on the people you learn from. Our next question. I know you've been saying OTAs don't matter as much to veterans. I agree for the most part, but I think there's one benefit you're missing with the Jets this year. With the new coaching staff, I think vets seeing the new playbook early adds some extra learning value compared with somebody who's just reading the playbook before training camp. Your thoughts? So the question, I think, is essentially, will OTAs benefit players because they'll start working in the system? And I have to say, that's a good point. I think I may have missed that. Good job. That's a very, very, very astute point by that question. My understanding is the playbook's really implemented in training camp. That's where they really put it in there. That's really where they start working on their core plays. But you know what? I think any exposure to the system probably helps. Is it I don't think it's a huge impact. But you know what? That's a very good point. I think that may be something that I'm missing. There probably is some extra value in a new coaching staff. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk breakout players. There's one I have my eye on. We know the Jets are a little bit weak at defensive tackle. There was an undrafted rookie last year who surprised us by making the roster and carving out a role with the team. His role could get bigger this year because of a lack of depth at the position. We'll talk about who that player is and why we might expect big things from him as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, name a Jets player who could break out this season, a guy we're not expecting to have a big role, who may end up getting a bigger role on the team than we think right now. How about Leonard Taylor? He was an undrafted rookie the Jets signed out of Miami last year and made the team. Very impressive in training camp. Actually kind of worked his way into a defensive line rotation and held up relatively well on a defensive line where pretty much no tackle other than Quinnen Williams looked very good. And, I always think about, what's a player's trajectory? And for Leonard Taylor, this could be a big offseason. Now, one of the other things I frequently say is that, the reason I say it is because it's true, is that for most players, the biggest improvement you make is between year one and year two. Year one, there's an old expression, drinking out of a fire hose. I mean, it's really hard to be a rookie in the NFL. I mean, think about when you graduated from college, how hard it was to move into the working world. It's a different life. In college, you're going to class, but you're not really, you have a lot of free time. Suddenly you're working 9 to 5. In the NFL, it's even tougher because you're not just leaving college, you're going up against world-class athletes, guys who are bigger, faster, stronger than you've ever faced. You've got a more complex playbook. You've got more detailed coaching than you've ever had. You're spending your entire day of practice. In college football, you have limited practice time. So it's a lot to get used to. And after year one, maybe you've adjusted. Maybe you've kind of caught on. So now year two comes and you're feeling pretty good about yourself. And you have the opportunity during the offseason to improve. For Leonard Taylor, I mean, I think in context, looking at his year one as a UDFA, he was pretty good. And the question is, how much better can he get? And another aspect of this is there's just not a lot of defensive tackle talent on this team. So I also look at opportunity. There are certain spots like a corner. We talked a little bit about Quantez Stiggers yesterday, how his best shot at carving out a role on the team might be at safety, because there's not really a pathway to Quantez Stiggers getting playing time at cornerback. Whereas defensive tackle, I mean, what's there behind Quinnen Williams? There's a very clear path for Leonard Taylor to be the second best defensive tackle on this team. So I might go with Leonard Taylor. He's kind of a guy who's been under the radar. We don't, nobody really talks about him that much, but he's a guy who impressed in his first year, I would say, relative to expectations. I think any UDFA who makes the team and then even finds a small role has beaten the spread. So, I think Leonard Taylor would be the guy I have my eye on, because, again, there's not much competition there. I mean, not like the guys the Jets signed at defensive tackle are any good. Next question is from Dan. If you could reverse any Jets transaction in the last 14 years, what would you do? I hate to say this, and I know people won't like this, but it would 100% be the Rodgers trade. And the reason I say that is, you look at the last 14 years, the Jets the Jets were never going to have the pieces to be good. If you eliminate some of Mike McCagnon's bad moves, the team would still be bad. It's not like the Jets were ever one move away under Mike McCagnon. You eliminate the Le'Veon Bell deal. I mean, Adam Gase is still the coach. The Jets are going to stink. And that's been true for most of the last 15 years. I mean, John Idzik, they should have signed a corner in 2014. I mean, that was kind of like a symbol of Idzik's failure, but not signing a corner, if they had signed a corner, it wouldn't have made that big of a difference. So the thing with the Rodgers trade is, it felt to me like the Jets were making genuine progress. During this 14-year stretch, there's only been once where the Jets in back-to-back seasons improved their win-loss record, and that was 20-21 and 21-22. That's the only stretch of the last 14 years, back-to-back years, the Jets improved their win total from 2 in 2020 to 4 in 2021 to 7 in 2022. Jets were moving in the right direction, and the Jets had this core of young players to build around. And they stopped building around him, and they got Aaron Rodgers. And, not to relitigate it, there were reasons to want to make the Rodgers move back in 2023, but there were also a lot of warning signs there. I mean, I think that looking back, people are kind of ignoring that Rodgers was coming off his worst season and was 39 years old. That was an issue. And then you hire Nathaniel Hackett, and you bring in Alan Lazard, or you bring in Randall Cobb, and you bring in Billy Turner. And instead of going out and signing a quality tackle and, maybe getting a stopgap quarterback and continuing to build around the young core, continuing to invest in draft picks, you just took this thing in a different direction. And the thing that will always be frustrating to me is, again, the Jets were showing actual direction for the first time in a decade and a half. The Jets had this group of great young players. And instead of augmenting this core, we just decided to throw everything behind a 39-year-old quarterback. I mean, look, the deal, I don't think the deal was guaranteed to fail at the time the Jets made it, but I think people in the Jets more than anybody just kind of ignored that there was a lot of potential downside to the deal. They ignored that there were a lot of warning signs to the deal. So I think that would be the one, because the Jets were finally heading in the right direction, and then they essentially started doing the opposite of everything they had done that was improving things. They had this stretch where they were getting better, and then they just said, let's do something completely different. And that's where they ended up, of course. And our last question, John, who's your all-time favorite Jets player? Wayne Corbett. I mean, how can you not love Wayne Corbett? I mean, I know it's a pretty generic answer, but I mean, come on, the local kid who really just got a tryout as a favor to Hofstra, because at that time the Jets were playing. The Jets practiced at Hofstra University. The Jets did not have their facility in Florham Park at this time. The Jets were using the field at Hofstra University. Wayne Corbett played at Hofstra, so I kind of just gave him a tryout as a favor. Wayne Corbett actually tried out in the Canadian Football League. It did not get offered a contract. He comes to the Jets and ends up being one of the greatest receivers in franchise history, and just an incredible story. A guy who's not very athletic, not very fast, but just so productive, so clutch. I mean, whenever you needed a big catch, Corbett was there to move the chains. I mean, the only guy that comes close to me And I've watched the Jets since 1993. The only guy that would come close to me would be a guy who played in the same era. Another pretty obvious answer, Curtis Martin, who just consistent, classy, played through injuries, everything you'd want in the player. So, those are my top two. Grabet's one, Martin's two. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. You enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.